So in this lesson, we're going to learn, now that we've learned how to add elements and remove elements to an array, we're going to learn how to search for them. Now, there are many ways that we can indeed do this. Things like index of, .includes, .findIndex, and .find. All of these are helpful utility functions that can help us on our journey to either finding an index or finding an object inside an array. And then we can go ahead and do something with it. So first off, let's assume that we have our drinks, and I'm going to create a new constant called index. Now we'll start with what we call the easy one, the index of. Now strings also have index of, as do arrays, which is how we are using them now. So if we were to say index of peach, because we're dealing with just a simple collection of strings, this will actually work really nicely. Now, index of, in fact, returns us -1 if it cannot find anything. Otherwise, it will return us the index, which is why it's called the index of, and then whatever we pass in. So in this instance, we can say if the index, and remember, if it's not present, we get -1. So we can say if the index does not equal -1, i.e. it is there available, we can go ahead and inside, instead of logging out the index, we're going to look up our drinks array and then pass the index in. So saving this will give us peach in the DevTools, as you can see over here. So that works nicely. And just to demonstrate what this index of in fact does, let's go ahead and just log the index above. So you can see here that we have this number 2, 0, 1, and 2. Now, it's important to note and remember that it needs to be case sensitive. You can see if we change this to a lowercase p, we then see -1. So it's not found. Otherwise, we'll get the index, and we could try out lime, for example. So this is a way that we can go and find a particular element and then reference it somewhere and perhaps mutate it or update it or do whatever you like to it. So let's move on to the next example. We'll use this space down here. We're going to say const, and we're going to call it included. We're going to say drinks.includes, and then we're going to pass in a string such as peach. If we go ahead and log this out, included, we'll then actually see a Boolean. We can hover over this and see the actual definition, but you can see it takes a string and returns a Boolean value. So again, we could go ahead and do something similar to the above with an if statement perhaps. So we'll save this out and reflect the changes in our DevTools. You can see that we have this true. Now, also like index of, this is again case sensitive. So we're going to get a false back if we spell things incorrectly or don't use the correct case. So these are two interesting mechanisms and two different use cases. We have the index of, which if we need to know the index, we're going to go ahead and use that. We can simply console log it out and reference that element inside that array. But if we just want a straight up yes or no, does this item exist inside this array, then we want to reach for array includes, which is added in ES 2015, so it's a much newer array prototype method. This is all fine and well until we encounter a slightly different data structure. At the moment, we're just dealing with an array with string elements. So let's go ahead and create this drinks with ID, and what we're going to do is pretty much the same as above. We're going to say the ID is 1, and the name is going to be lemonade. We'll go ahead and duplicate this. Now we'll change this one over to lime. We'll change this one over to peach. And we can go ahead and update those IDs so they're all unique. So with our index of approach, we can't actually use this because if you hover over the function definition, you can see that it's expecting a string. Now we're dealing with an array of objects, so we can't pass in a string. So how might we go about finding a particular item? Thankfully, there's a fairly new addition to the JavaScript language called findIndex. So the findIndex is essentially going to give us the same behavior as the index of will, and it will return -1 as well, should the item not be found. So let's go ahead and say the ID index is going to be the result of our drinks with ID, and we're going to call this findIndex method. We can pass in a value and say, does the value.name equals, and we can say peach. So now underneath, we can go ahead and log this out. We'll do ID index, and let's just hit save and see what we get in the console. So you can see here that we've still got everything from before, all of our console logs from above. However, we've got this new on line 25, this number, which represents this object here. So interestingly, using findIndex is similar to index of, but index of is mainly for sort of primitives such as strings and arrays, but index of isn't really going to help us when dealing with more complex data structures. So this is where findIndex comes into play, gives us a value, we can ask for our particular property, we can make sure that it equals or does not equal anything we like, so it's up to you to implement this piece here. It could be from a form submission or a click event perhaps, and then we want to go ahead and do something with that index. Now, just like we did before, we might say the drinks with ID, square bracket, ID, and then index. So this will in fact give us the entire item back of peach, as we can see in the DevTools. So this method is nice and flexible if you want to perhaps do something with the index, or perhaps do something with the element inside the array after. Now, if we do not need the index, we don't care about the index, there's an even easier way that we can go and find a particular element that's part of a more complex data structure than a simple string. Here I'm going to say constant, we're going to call this the found item. We'll take our drinks with ID and we'll call .find. We'll take the value, and much like above where we said value.name, we'll do exactly the same and say equals, and followed by peach. Let's go ahead and just log this out so we can see what we've got inside our found item. So here you can see that we have the exact same result as the above. However, the above is giving us the index and we're looking up our array, whereas this, we're not supplying an index, we're just simply saying, go into the data structure, find my object property, and if it matches, just please give it to me back. So we've covered quite a lot of ground in this video. We've looked at a simple data structure of strings. We've used index of with a string value. Index of, if it's not found, it returns -1, and then we can go ahead and reference our array should we need to. If you just want a straight up yes or no, a Boolean answer of true or false, we can use the array.includes to see if your item is included in the array. And if we want to deal with, which we probably will more frequently, a more complex data structure, we could be more clever and pass in a callback function, which allows us to extract particular pieces of data, such as a data property, and ask for it to be returned back to us. In this case, we're using the find index, which is similar to .find, and it may be that you choose to use this option as it might be slightly more flexible. Otherwise, if you just want the item in its entirety, then .find is the one you need.